Well, I'm Vincent.
What did you say?
I'm Vincent. I'm in my car, in my garage in Australia.
Okay, first of all, I would like to welcome you to the three continents of awakening. This is a bunch of beautiful people I have with me here, and we're going to talk about the first fetter in the fetter model, which is identification and no self versus no self. And before we start, I would like if we just can say our names and which continent we're sitting at, so people on Spotify can hear it as well. My name is Pernille Moore, and I'm from Denmark, but I'm sitting in Shrewsbury in the UK.
My name's Leona. I'm also in the UK on the south coast in Sussex.
My name is Todd Lent, and I am in New York, in the US, in North America.
My name is Branimir Staletovic. I'm in Europe, Austria, Vienna.
I'm Kathy. I'm also from Australia, in a small country town in New South Wales.
I'm Jeff in British Columbia, Canada, west coast of North America.
And I'm Vincent. I'm in Australia.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So what we're going to talk about today is, the idea is that we talk about the story, the individual story that you have. How did you see through self? And then talk about what was the most complicated part for you, or as a guide, what has been, in your experience, the most complicated part with seeing through self, seeing through the first fetter. And then also, what advice do you have for people that are just starting out in the process? And I would like for it just to be, cozy conversation. So not anything strict or anything. So, yeah. Anybody would like to start?
I can start. It's fine. So you want to ask me some questions, or should I?
I would like to hear your story, how you saw through self, because I know you haven't done the LU guiding and you haven't done the fetter model. When we spoke or wrote to one another, you said that you basically fell backwards into a rabbit hole.
Many times.
I would like to hear about that.
Yeah. So Branimir here speaking. I mean, I started this process, I think 2 years or 3 years ago. I started meditating 2019, I think. I took an online course. It was about it was supposed to last over a year and a half, which it did at the end. And it was about different meditation techniques. There was not much talk about no self, so I didn't know about that back then, or awakening. I just heard these beautiful stories, Buddhist stories about our true nature and so forth, but didn't go that deep. But very soon, certain things started to shift with meditation. I didn't have context back then about awakening, no self. But then, as soon as I started to, be more interested, I get completely obsessed with, no self and end of suffering. So I turned basically the internet upside down to look for pointers. Didn't find them, or there was some, but I think that back then there was no that many non-dual teachers or YouTube videos as today, or I'm not, or maybe I'm mistaken, but it seems that there was not that many as today. So what happened? So that took for, I don't know, a few months looking meditating. I had some experience. I couldn't call them no self experience, but there was something. I knew this is all. It's not crap, you know. It's true what people are talking, because there was something there after a certain meditation practice I had, especially resting meditation with having no objects, basically, particular just resting in what it is, in what arises, being completely open to what it is. And then I watched some video, and then some guy mentioned Liberation Unleashed. They have pointers. So I went straight there to the website. There was this book called Gateless Gate Crushers, right? Is that correct?
Yeah.
So I went to the pointers. They were very simple. So the first thought was, this is too simple. But then it made sense. I don't know, after a while. So I just looked through them, and there was a few pointers about, I can't remember exactly what it was, correct, but it was about just look, everything is happening, hearing is happening, seeing is happening already. There's no one behind this. There's no agent. It's just happening. Things are basically happening. And then I have something here. Sorry, there's something on my. And then I just stayed with that night. I could notice something is shifting, but it was not any shift. But I could sense something. Then the next morning, I got up. I did meditation. I was, for the first time in my life, I could just be 20 minutes present with no breaks. It seemed like very peaceful. And then I went out, and I just remember these pointers basically from the book. I think I worked with seeing or hearing, just the sound and objects around me. Just look, everything is already happening, and just stayed with that, resting in that. And then something completely cracked there. It was huge energy release. I just directly see that there is no self basically behind the seeing, behind the hearing, behind any direct experience that we had. It was very, very clear. Just, it felt amazing. It was very ecstatic feeling. I was in the park. I remember I stayed there for a couple of hours, walked around the city then, and this stayed with me for this feeling for a couple of days, and then it stayed for a couple of weeks. It was not intellectual, but it was the experience was still there, so to say, until it went away after, not went away, just, life hit me back again, and all reactivity came back. But that was very, very clear seeing. And from that point on, I knew this is real. This is real. I have to go. I have to move on. I didn't know how, but I'm not going to talk about the rest of the journey, obviously, now. But very simple pointers. It made sense. I didn't work with thoughts, with thinking process back then so much. That came later, just with resting and but from this perspective, it was not just about the pointers it was all the foundations behind before that it was created with this meditation program, basically, which never gave me pointers, but they did, I would say, create some kind of a foundation basis for this to happen. But no, I can talk right now about that, or later, what is needed from my experience, what helped me.
Thank you. Really, really great. So I'm just going to ask you a few questions. So what did it for you was the realizing that in the seeing there's just the seeing, and in the hearing there's just the hearing, and there's not a self seeing anything. The perception of a self is a thought. It's not a thing. And it was just keep looking at going to a park, keep looking at that, and then it happened. So that's it's
that was, and then when it happened, it was basically very clear that there's no self in in life. Basically, it was all a big story I made up.
Yeah.
It was just, because the belief in self is so strong, so foundational to my existence, human existence, that when I saw it, and this is all a big lie, illusion, I would say, it was just huge energy release. It was very, very ecstatic. I never experienced anything like that. Even the later shifts, they were more profound in a way. I would say more intimate, subtle, but not that, I would say, like strong and energy release. It was huge.
Yeah, because you're right. There's. I mean, all of the fetters is about identification and about realizing how much we identify with, and it's different shift in every single fetter. But we're going to talk about the other fetters in another episode. This one is just about the first one.
Right.
Not just about the first, because for many people the first one is like the mind-blowing one.
Yeah,
Thank
it was
you so much, Branimir.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
So can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
Branimir, yeah. When I mean, it's easy to say in the seeing there's just the seeing, in the hearing there's just the heard. But obviously that somehow triggered this energy release for you. So like the average person is going to go around and without realizing it, when they hear something, there's a little story going on in their head where they say, I am hearing this and I am hearing something out there. So consequently, they miss this experience that you had, which was the hearing, which was this is where language gets really hard, which was sound without origin. Or can you describe that experience of hearing? Let's just keep it with hearing because that's the easiest one, I guess. But can you describe your experience of hearing and how the idea that there was somebody hearing fell away?
No, I cannot.
Okay,
That's
good
the
answer.
Yeah. I know what you, but I can. That I mentioned that day, my mind at that moment, my mind was very quiet. Like I could sense that there was something about to happen. I didn't know what, how, what it's going to look, but I could really sense this is because there was something about that night, the night before when I read the book, and there was as I said, you have to be extremely curious for this in order to happen. This has to be the most important thing in your life. Point. This is nothing else. I mean, everything everything else has to be secondary.
Yeah.
if you want this really to happen, and then this is the basis for everything. So this was my life day and night, waking up with awakening. That sounds weird. Waking up with awakening and going to bed with these thoughts, with this thinking. It was. But also you have to find a balance, not to have anticipation and a big expectation how this is going to look like. And this was at that day, my mind didn't expect anything. It could sense something, but didn't really didn't want something to happen, like grasp onto it. I just could sense, okay, I just have to rest and see, go as every other day. And then I just stayed with the sound as the hearing. Just I never did like that in my life. I never experience present moment like that, like the pointer suggested.
That actually makes me, now I have a question for all of you, because I completely agree with Branimir of the importance of being diligent, of keep going back to it again and again and again and again, but at the same time not having any expectation to anything happening. just asking all of you, do you have similar experience like that, or is it completely different for you?
I just want to say one thing that was really relevant that Branimir said. When I woke, well, I had various shifts in my waking up, but I got to the point, and I think everyone has to get to the, well, I can only talk for myself, where it was do or die. There was absolutely no point carrying on my life if I couldn't have this shift. It was like something was pending and it just had to drop, and there was no point. I was pushed against the wall or checkmated by God or something, and there was no, I mean, life was just had no value for me unless whatever this thing that was happening to me, just I had to see it through, or there was no point, because where I'd got to in my life, it had no meaning left. So that really reminded me what Branimir said about you have to need it with, you know, every fibre of your being. I think that's really that was really relevant to me.
I just got a reminder about a meeting tomorrow.
Yeah.
I think expectations can be sometimes obvious, but sometimes hard to even know that you're kind of comparing your experience, or that you're kind of expecting a shift to feel a particular way from guiding that you get or teaching that you see. And one thing that was, I didn't have like one big amazing experience of seeing through the illusion of self. I've had lots of little ones, but that's not to say that they weren't remarkable and didn't have a big impact on my life. But I think particularly in some of so I come from a Buddhist background with this, and some of the teachings are quite kind of grandiose, and they can make they can build a sort of expectation or make it seem like you may as well give up in this lifetime and wait for future lifetimes if that's the kind of thing that you believe in, because it's such a remote possibility. And I'm sure there's a particular purpose for that in them. So one of the things that was really critical for me was coming across a teacher by the name of Ken MacLeod, who's in the US. And like Branimir was talking about, looking in direct experience, and, you know, something's going on that's seeing things, something's going on that's hearing things, and then pointing back to, well, who's seeing, who's hearing? When I used to kind of ask myself that, I just felt it was so clear, well, I am. That's so obvious, I am. And then this teacher, Ken MacLeod, said, maybe ask, what experience is this? And instead of waiting for some big miraculous, you know, parting of the clouds and, you know, big miraculous kind of event, just notice if there's a shift when you ask that. And he talked about it from memory, this is years ago now, that you know, it's not necessarily a verbal thing. You don't come up with the answer straight away, but just notice if there's a shift. And doing that, like, okay, here's the visual field, seeing, here's hearing, sounds. What experience is that? And there's just, for me, a shift. And I went, maybe that's what they're talking about. So I hadn't even kind of realized that I'd built up some expectation of what it would be like until there was a pointer from someone who could describe it as something sort of small. And that kind of just, it didn't even make it an achievable thing. It just showed it to me in my experience. And, you know, I think sometimes the shifts that happen, even though they might not seem to be, you know, really, really big somehow, if they stay with you and you always will remember that moment, I think that's a bit of a clue of the impact.
Yeah.
But the other thing was, and I think this is really key for anyone, just about happiness in general, let alone seeing through the self, is realizing that your thoughts are not reliable, that in fact, most of the time, there's no truth in them. And that's an incredibly liberating realization. It doesn't mean that you won't keep falling for the content of thoughts, but just to know when you look, is this true? And there's plenty of teachers around who have some guides about that. And I think Byron Katie's probably the biggest one. Just a way to really interrogate the truth of your thoughts. And that was a really amazing moment for me of realizing, oh my God, I don't have to struggle because this thinking that's going on and these thoughts are not telling me the truth. So why, even though they may contain some kind of or cause some sort of painful reaction, that's going on, but I'm not doing that. So by not believing my thoughts and seeing that they're not reliable, you kind of ask in the same way that you ask, well, who's hearing and who's seeing? Well, who's thinking? Because this notion of I that I have, if I had a choice, I wouldn't have those thoughts, but there they are. And so who's the thought that doesn't want the thoughts? And you get to see, well, that's actually also a thought. And it seems as much as we strive and struggle, it's impossible just for I, which is a thought or a feeling, to do something about another thought or another feeling, you know, and that just, I think, has a feeling of liberation, some sort of, what would you say, just the relief at being able to let go of struggle. And that to me is also what keeps me not just curious, but like Leona's saying, that makes this the biggest thing in my life. The fact that there may be relief from suffering, relief from struggle, and then also just a chance to see into this incredible kind of mystery, like how is all this here? Who's putting everything here? People have their theories, but you know, that's really a remarkable opportunity in life to be able to have a look at that.
Yeah, it's a really important point that you have there, Kathy, that the thoughts are not true. Just because we have a thought about something doesn't mean that thought is truth. It's just a thought. Really, really good. Does somebody else want to share their story, follow up, like Branimir did?
Yes, I could go next.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll try to condense 20 years down into a few minutes. So basically, I discovered meditation and Buddhism in college, my early 20s, and kind of immediately, like, the idea of like enlightenment became sort of the only thing worth striving for in life. Essentially, that became like, oh, well, if that thing's a possibility, then of course, why would anybody do anything but that? And you know, over the course of the years, there were many ups and downs where I was in the path, away from the path. I tried many different types of meditation, but I think the key thing that kept me engaged and coming back was because I had had a lot of anxiety issues and depression and things like that. And actually encountering the idea of no self through Buddhism in my 20s, even though I hadn't directly experienced it, there was something there which, you know, with anxiety, everything is focused inward on protecting this sense of self. And there was something that resonated with that assurance that there really is no self there to be protected. And that like loosened up that boundary around it. And so even though I hadn't had these big shifts or anything, something really resonated with that idea. And, you know, for many years, it was like a guiding philosophy, even though I didn't know how to really experience it myself. And then I think I had subtle shifts over many years, kind of experiencing different things, but not really knowing how to classify it, because like Kathy said, some of the text that I would read would make it sound like this is an absolutely earth-shattering experience that is, undeniable and life changes forever, or that it's something that you're going to strive for thousands of lifetimes and maybe going to get it one day, maybe not. And I was constantly pushing and pulling back and forth between those extremes. And so kind of fast forwarding to 2021, well, actually, sometime before that, I had been getting back into I had gone through all the non-duality roots of Eckhart Tolle and Muji and all of that stuff, and reading, watching videos, that sort of thing. So it had kind of been percolating and imbuing, but I wasn't able to really practice as much during those years because I was taking care of my mom at the time. And then somewhere through one of the YouTube videos, I think that's how I first heard about Liberation Unleashed. And so I looked into their forum, and I was really intrigued by this idea, but I was also worried that, well, if I do this, maybe it's going to blow something out and I'm not going to be functional. So as I was still taking care of my mom, I'm like, I'm going to put this off on the back burner for a while because I need to be able to, function and take care of daily life. But I did read The Gateless Gatecrashers, and again, there's this resonance that yeah, there's something there that really makes sense. There's something that really sounds like truth, but I was keeping it at arm's length. And then she had passed away in that February of that year. And then I did a 5-day Zoom meditation retreat. And after that, I had this big whatever it was, whether it was a shift, something. I basically spent like a day and a half walking around. I've never done shrooms, but it's basically what I assume shrooms are like. Like everything was super vivid, super colorful. I was just like, oh my God, like touching the tips of the evergreens. And I'm like, wow, like it's just so beautiful. I'm like feeling that. It was just amazing. And then that alternated with like driving to the store and actually having to pull off because I was crying so much because like I put on a Tool album and it was like I just felt like my heart was wrenching open and I'm crying, and didn't really like know where to contextualize that, but immediately signed up for the LU forum. And I'm like, okay, now's the time. Like I've got to do this. And the irony is that when my guide picked me up on LU, she later told me that from, for those who aren't familiar, when you sign up with LU, there are a bunch of questions that you answer to start with, kind of saying your background experience and, what you expect to get out of it and that sort of thing. And having read those, she actually thought that I had already seen through the self at that point. And looking back, I think to a certain degree I had, and didn't know again how to contextualize it or how to talk about it. And unfortunately, well, I guess the other thing I should say is that in LU, it's a little bit undefined as far as whether we're working with just Fetter 1, or they really identify it as like we're technically working through the first 3 fetters in terms of getting through the gate. And so there was, we kind of worked on every possible area that could be misconstrued as a self. And, my guide gave me like every pointer in the book, basically. So it took like 9 months, and largely it was very repetitive because I was really so stuck in what we call Fetter 2, the doubt of whether I had seen or what I was seeing, or this can't be it, or, this doesn't seem to be what I'm hearing all of these other people describing. And so again, very, very long story, but the short version is towards the end of that, I had somehow stumbled on a Robert Saltzman talk, and he made this comment about there are certain things in our life that just you cannot know and nobody will ever know. And that was such a big hang up in my whole resistance to everything in this process, was trying to, you know, but I need to know something. I need to know this. I need to be sure about this. Are we sure? And it just dropped like a weight. And I just felt like, oh. And then all of the finding of no self just made complete sense at that point. And it was like there was nothing else there resisting. But even so, like I finished up with LU, I answered the questions, I got confirmed, all of that. And then there were still kind of like lingering doubts of like, well, is this really what everybody was talking about? But over time, like I actually started working with Christiana on the 4th and 5th fetters, but at that, after even a while into that, it was like, there was question of like, did I really see through the 1st fetter? Like, is it really fully dropped? And so I kind of went back and was working again with those things like, no, there's nothing there. But it was really that kind of 2nd fetter doubt that was still a little bit lingering. And then I remember one day I was on a ladder trimming bushes, and I just had this thought about looking back to this, you know, this self. And it was like another one of those, like, it's just so ludicrous. Like, it's this concept, like, of course there's nothing. And it just like, I started laughing, like, it was just this absurd thing. And it was like, yeah, no, that's just, you know, like no. And it was kind of just like the dropping of that whole issue. And things progressed since then, which has been wonderful. But yeah, but it was not a directly linear path, and it was not something where there was like one big decisive thunderclap of a shift. It was like this gradual shifting and changing over the course of years, to the extent where, you know, looking back, like I have no idea what life even looked like before then, or how I was reacting, because it's been such a long process that, you know, there's no way to know how things have even changed now compared to as they were then. I'm sure that they are very, very different, but there's no really good decisive memory of how I related to everything back then. So
I have a clear memory because I knew you just before you went through LU. I have a very clear memory, and you had so much, you just had such a deep doubt of yourself. You didn't trust in your experience. You were really heavy. You seemed quite depressed, just really bogged down, perhaps more than depressed, really bogged down in your own thoughts and in a quagmire of doubt. Sorry, yeah. But you were still lovely, but you had all that.
Thanks. No,
I can't even imagine you being like that now, Todd.
Thanks. Yeah, no, you are not wrong at all, Leona. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
You seem so joyful, Todd. Do you feel like now you're a joyful something or other?
Oh God, yes. Yeah, I mean, it has drastically changed things. Yeah, it's really radically changed. I had always had like a you know, I mean, there was always anxiety, there was always depression, there were things like that, but also outwardly, I always had a pretty affable, you know, good-natured kind of vibe. So it wasn't terrible, but inside there was a lightness here and a freedom and an openness that was definitely not there before. So that I can absolutely say for sure. And then that has also increased greatly with, you know, further fetter work. That's also really helped. But keeping it back to the 1st fetter, it's still, yeah, there was so much even after that, even though, again, it took a long time for the doubts to really settle down and to really embrace. and some of that also, I'll just say, like, guiding actually really helped, because I started, it was some months after I got through LU, I started guiding, and that really helped to focus and solidify. And the other thing was, I never really stopped the inquiry, like, because there's always something to investigate. And so, you know, anytime this, like Kathy was saying, like, there's a thought that brings up something, like, is there any belief in that thought? Like, is there any attachment to that thought? Well, let's not just let it go. That's another opportunity for investigation. So look at it. Where's the thinker? Why am I believing that? Is there truth to that? How do I know anything? Like it was just like a constant thing. And it's helped as a guide, but it's also greatly just helped continue to deepen and re-solidify the seeing.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I have two things. The first thing is that it's so important, I think, in the first Fetter to really realize that just because you have a feeling about something or a thought about something doesn't mean that you need to act on it. It's you know, it's just a feeling, or it's just a thought. You don't need to do anything. Just let it be, and it will pass, you know. Just like a smell of a rose is passing, or a cloud is passing, or you don't need to do anything. Just, you know. And the other thing I wanted to say is that I think it's so valuable that we're doing this, because so far we have heard like so different stories, completely different ways of experiencing how the first Fetter falls. And we talked about it before we started to record, that there's so many different ways of seeing through self. There's so many different experiences, and there's not one experience or one way that's the right way. And I think a lot of people are actually seeing through self, but they stay stuck in doubt in the second Fetter, because they compare themselves with other experiences. And that's why I think what we're doing here, it's so important to so everybody can hear the 8 different experiences that we have, and all of them are equally valid, and everybody that is sitting listening are having a different experience, and it's so important to remember. Thank you so much, Todd.
Thank you.
Next one.
I'm happy to go next. So mine happened. I don't have any background in Buddhism or anything. And so about 4 years ago, I do remember Ramana Maharshi posing the question, who am I? And I used to sit and sort of think, who am I? And I never got anywhere with it. It didn't do anything for me. But I remember reading somebody's reply on that. They said, they are nothing. So when I was sitting, I was doing a completely basic meditation once in a blue moon. And I was sitting and I thought, well, let's see if there's anything in there then. So I looked inside and there was just no self. It was just clear, transparent, lovely spaciousness. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. Gosh, I'd never looked before. And I thought, oh yeah, there is nothing there. And then the next morning I had to look inside again when I was quiet, and again, there was nothing. And I thought, oh, okay, that's cool. Didn't think anything of it. Went about my life, you know, for a few years, not assuming anything that I'd woken up or seen through anything major. You know, I just thought that's quite an interesting discovery, but carried on as normal. I did feel that my heart had opened up though, and that I was privy, I had sort of earned, I don't know what it was, earned access to my heart, like there had been a gatekeeper in it, and then I saw there was no one there, and I'd read a Drombola Melchizedek book about the heart being, I'm probably completely misquoting it because it was years ago, like the heart being a cave and there's a gatekeeper there and you can only gain access when you're ready. And that kind of caught my imagination, and it's actually what it felt like, that I had gained access and this heart space opened up and it was fathomless, and I was only on the edge of this nothingness, and I knew it was vast, and I could, you know, I just saw blackness, nice blackness, not bad blackness, but I didn't I was only at the tip of something. But anyway, I just carried on with my life. And then I had a bit of a tumultuous relationship, on-off relationship with someone, and my dad had died. And because my dad had just died, I was really grasping onto this relationship that wasn't working. We eventually split up for good. And the irony is that he'd got himself a new girlfriend, and he lives quite close to me. And I saw on his Facebook that she was coming to stay with him. And so I'd seen a photograph of her. And one morning I went for a walk, and I passed her on a walk. She didn't know who I was. And I just was friendly. I said, good morning, as I passed her. And I saw something in her that intrigued me. And it could have been complete projection on my part. But I saw this open, non-grasping air about her, because I was just grasping onto this guy. And I thought, oh my God, that's so beautiful and refreshing. And oh my God, if only I could be a bit like that. And the next day I went for my walk, I sort of put myself in that position of just being open and free and non-grasping and easy about life. My God, I had this major shift. Everything fell. That was probably my point of awakening, even though I still saw through the self-illusion prior to that. That's when everything just dropped. And I felt I was in heaven for a week, and everything was shiny and bright and new and perfect, and everything was in its right place. And there was nothing, even all the traumas and atrocities in life had their own perfection and rightness to them. And even the dirt on the floor shone with light and beauty. Everything was absolutely exquisite. And I would sit in my garden, because it was the summer, and I would just sit in my garden and just, wow, it looked like I was on drugs. And I'd go for a walk and I'd think, oh God, people must think I'm completely nuts or high as a kite. Like my jaw would be dropping, and it was just amazing. And I had, so everything fell at that point. You know, the fetters didn't exist. I was just completely free. And then slowly, I began to regroup. And then a few years after that, I thought, okay, the time's right. I knew that there was still something that needed to drop. And I was looking online and I found LU. And I thought, oh God, I better be ready. I know that it had an energy, and I knew that if I was going to sign up for LU, I better be ready for it. And so I waited maybe in a month. I just waited for the inner signal to just go and start and find myself a guide. And it was very quick on there. It was a matter of a few weeks, if that. I had a lovely guide. And what I realized was what needed to drop was my attachment and my understanding about thoughts. I hadn't recognized that thoughts weren't me. So of course, thoughts, as far as I was concerned, were me. And thoughts commenting on thoughts, that's so selfing. So I began to sort of loosen the grasp on the thinking and the mind, and really inquiring into everything that's presented in LU. And then I had another way. That's right. That's when I described about Branimir saying, it was do or die for me at that point. There was absolutely no point proceeding with my life unless this final thing dropped. And I could feel it really close. And I remember Luciana, I wanted to have a chat because I was doing a bit of Zoom with her as well as writing in the forum. And she cancelled a meeting. I knew I was so close. I got so incredibly frustrated. I didn't let her know, but I was so physical and unviolent physically, and I was banging the chair. I was laughing at myself because I knew I was being over dramatic. No, I must speak with her. I'm so close. Like this. And I mean, I laughed at myself. I wasn't really, really angry. I was just absolute frustration. And then, actually, I listened to a Scott Killaby YouTube video where he inquires into the self. And I just brought up that sense of what is this Leona inside me that's still hanging around, the sense of Leona. Because even though I'd look inside, there's nothing there, I still had this feeling of Leona. And I brought it up and I just inquired into it. And that's when everything then fell away. And all my attachments, even some of the things I love to do fell away. It was fine though. And actually just prior to that, I remember looking in my garden at my apple tree, and I've described as tupanilla. It just dissolved in front of me, and behind it, all that remained was love. And it was showing me, and it wasn't sentimental love, it was just a practical, pragmatic, maybe, I don't know. It was just, well, I don't know, I want to label it, it wasn't pragmatic, I don't know what it was, but it was just showing me the fabric behind what we would call life. And yeah, so that was the beginning. And then I felt that very much like when it all fell away, you know, people talk about being really scared just at the point where they're about to let go. And I felt a tingle of fear. It was only like a tingle, so it was quite nice. And I was like, oh no, I wanted to be bigger because then I know I'm closer. And so I kind of embraced it, and it wasn't that scary. But then when it all dropped, I really felt like I was in like the North Sea, a vast ocean, cold, dark, vast ocean without a buoy to hold on to, without a buoy to, you know, and I was just there being tossed in this sea, and everything that I had felt, had related to, disappeared. And I remember going to sleep for a few nights and feeling really kind of lost in this ocean, because I realized how comforting this sense of Leona was when I'd fall asleep. I'd kind of rest in this feeling of me, and then I would just drop off. And I didn't recognize I'd been doing that, but that was no more there. And I've had this a few times where I had obviously been holding something before it fell away. Like I've like a Fetter 8 thing, part of Fetter 8 fell away, but there was no inside of me. I saw there was no inside of me left. And then I felt like something's missing. And that's when I felt that with Fetter 1, that there was no Leona, and it felt very uncomfortable until I kind of was able to settle in, which took quite a while to settle all in and stuff. So that's me really. But yeah, it was a thought that was really important to recognize that they weren't who I am, and they just passed through. And the thoughts, commenting on thoughts, was a really tricky one to get my head around, and I think quite a lot of people have that problem. Yeah, and just having to have total honesty really helps. Total, utter honesty about what's really here, and all the tricks that all the avoidance strategies. Just always being really, really honest with myself was key.
Yeah, I completely agree. That unconditional acceptance is such a key factor in this, because if we don't accept anything that comes up, and even things we do not want, then accept that you do not want it, but still accept it, still create space for it, because otherwise it's never ever gonna. You have to embrace absolutely everything and have such compassion for oneself. If you don't open to everything that's ugly inside yourself, you can't drop it. So you have to own everything. Yeah, you need
the good,
to
the bad, the ugly.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah. So as you say, you have to make space for it all and have compassion for yourself through it. It's the only way.
And another thing that I find really interesting, that I really want to emphasize, is that experience that both Todd and Leona running around, and it's just for anybody who's watching or seeing, if you ever meet anybody walking in the park, standing completely looking into a leaf with tears running down their face, it's probably because they're in the beginning of seeing through self. They might not be in swim. But also that is just the beginning. It's not the feather falling. It's not, you haven't even started. It's like you're saving up on the energy bank with all that, unicorn and rainbow period that you're in, the honeymoon period, I think, and Angelo De Lulu, he calls it, that you're in that beautiful, beautiful period, and then it really gets, it can get really, really tough. And like you say, Leona, that that when you really realized that the thoughts connected to it was what held you back, and there was no Leona to fall into when you fall asleep at night, that was the big scary one. Really, really relevant.
I felt lost. I felt like all was lost. There was no me anymore, and it just felt really peculiar and quite bleak inside. Yeah, I've experienced that a few times where it feels quite bleak when something drops until it kind of settles in, and then there's some beauty that then can come forward and be sort of sat in, yeah, or expressed or whatever.
It makes me want to bring up how you know if you've had just like a conceptual sort of understanding versus an experiential one. I think they're the terms that Kevin uses. Because they're both valid, aren't they? You know, sometimes it can feel like it's easy to dismiss something as just being conceptual, but actually that's a good starting point to even notice that there's something to question. Absolutely. And then also because we do all walk around with no self, it can be easy to kind of go, when you start to see it a bit, oh yeah, that's it, okay, I've got it, versus being willing to kind of, or not willing, because maybe it happens on its own. But when you see the difference between the seeing through the concept with a concept, so to speak, I think, you know, what's that analogy? Using a thorn to remove a thorn, versus when something really shows up in your experience in a very undeniable way. And I think that is a really key part of not realizing, what's the way to put it? Seeing what's doubtless in your experience. Because doubt can really operate, but mostly only at the conceptual level, I think. Like when you start to see that doubt is just a thought. Yeah, I don't know. I'm getting a bit lost trying to talk about it, really. But I think we probably all know what I mean, the difference between the conceptual versus the experiential.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know, Vince, you have a lot of experience with that. I just want to make an advertisement here for Vince and his Sunday meeting. For anybody that is starting out and seeing through the self and starting with the Fetter work, I can warmly recommend the Sunday meeting that Vince has. And Vince, I know that you have had a lot of people, I think, lately at least, that has understood about identification and about the non-self. They have understood it intellectually, but they haven't really, you know, gotten past that. They haven't experienced it. They have understood it cerebrally. Understood it. Could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I can. I was thinking I'd like to go last with my story because it's a bit at odds with your aim here. So if Jeffrey and Sandra do it first, and I
would like to hear this part because you have some really good pointers.
Okay. Well, the thing is that when I came to LU in 2011, I started guiding almost straight away, and probably within 12 months or so, I was getting a little bit bored with the repetitive things that the pointers that I was using, and somehow or other somebody asked for a change. Some client asked, could I have a different guide because I'm not getting anywhere? And I thought, oh, this could be interesting because I'm kind of operating a bit on automatic. But if I get somebody like this to guide, then I'll have to look deeper into myself, because these are so-called difficult people to get through. They've been there for many pages on LU. So I took on that person, and quite quickly I ended up with a whole lot of people like that. So over the 11 years, I've never counted them, but I would well and truly have exceeded 100 people that I've guided. And of those 100, let's just say 100, probably 85 of them have been those kind of people that have been, I would say, that see it intellectually. They have a good grasp of it in their mind, but they haven't. Their beliefs haven't changed to allow them to see the world from the perspective of somebody who, in this case, we're talking about the first fetter, or somebody who is awake. Because they're saying to themselves, I haven't had a shift. It hasn't happened. It hasn't happened. It hasn't happened. And so I'm not there. And so consequently, that shaped the way they've seen the world. But I must say, with working with all of those people, the level of success, interesting word, but the level of people who actually had a shift, and by this shift I'm talking about that it became a experiential understanding, that shift. I don't know what the success rate would be, but it was probably 50-50 or something like that. That's just what comes to mind. I don't know how accurate it is. And then all those, the other 50% of people just dropped off. They gave up in the end. Some people I guided for 35 pages. You know, I've got one lady I've been guiding for about 8 years, and she's exactly in this situation. She's got it all together, everything. She got the lot, but she doesn't think so. so consequently, she still suffers. Okay. So that's the basis of working with those people, and the somehow or other it was just the right time in history or whatever, but Zoom came along and it was around for a while. But then it occurred to me that it would be really good if some of these people could come together in a group like this and talk to people who were already awake. Then their ideas about what it was like to be awake might change. And they do, you know, and it works really well. So consequently, if you did want to come to this group, just get me your email address and I'll put you on a list. So do you want me to talk about my experience, or just keep it at that for this?
No, it's fine. If you want to talk about your story, you can talk about it last. But I just want to say that my experience when I have watched the recordings of your Sunday meeting, it's been really, really great, because there's been this poor guy that has been sitting and going like, I do not understand, and then you have 4 or 5 guys around him that has seen through self and are further along in their fetter work, and all of them sit and come with pointers from different angles. And it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful to watch, because it's also why I really love this concept of the three continents of awakening, because it's beautiful to see a group where you have people sitting from all over the world, and the experiences on the bottom line it's the same, but the way to get there is different. And that's why it's so helpful having a group like you do, where there's so many that has seen through self and that are sitting and supporting. It's like a live video LU guiding, which is just really, really beautiful, very, very useful. I really think it's great, and I warmly recommend it to everybody that listens. Yeah.
I just wanted to also interject and say that actually, prior to Vince having started that, when I was still going through LU, there were these monthly meetings for people who had been through LU, and I got invited by my guide to. She mistakenly thought that they were allowed to get, you know, have people come who they were still guiding, and so I got to attend a couple of these meetings with everybody who had already been through LU. And it was such a demystifying experience that I actually credit that as a large part of what broke down that kind of expectation barrier that had been there. So the fact that then Vince started that meeting where people could routinely have that experience every 2 weeks was incredibly beneficial. So yeah.
Yeah, I just want to quick mention what Katie said. I mean, it's, I would say it's impossible to talk about what is the difference between conceptual, seeing, and experiential. You cannot talk about that. It just, and it's fine. it's you don't need to know this. Basically, what's the difference between this or that? It's just fine. Letting go of, if wanting to know, you're directing the mind towards something else. The one really understanding what is this about. This is not about understanding, you just experience, and it's fine not knowing it. And basically it's impossible to talk about the difference between this or that. It just completely, this is fine. People talk, using word consciousness, probably it's right. Something that is not a thought, something that is definitely something that we experience, but we cannot put it in words. I cannot explain it to myself, even though I know how it feels.
I imagine that everybody that's had an experiential shift has also had an intellectual, a conceptual story before that or during that.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, I also think there's a lot of people like Leona talked about, and also like Angelo talks about, that there's something is happening, and it's also my own experience, something happening and not really sure what it is, not really knowing what it is, but just feel something is different. Everything that used to be is not anymore. Something is different, and not knowing exactly what it is, and then just going about life, and that was it.
Dropping away, something's gone. But but I think conceptual is in the mind, and the experiential is in the body. It's lived, and that's to me what the difference is with concept or experience. Okay, you might have to have some level of conceptual understanding of it. Well, you don't, because I didn't. But it has to be, for it to be a real awakening, it has to be grounded in the body. It has to be experienced and lived, not just staying in the head, because that's nothing. That's useless.
I didn't have a conceptual awakening or conceptual knowing. I didn't know conceptually what was happening. I just had an experience about everything being different. Woke up and everything was different. Nothing was the same, and everything that used to be me, and all my worries and all my concerns and all my projections and all of that was just gone. It was a Tolle thing, it was just gone. And I had no idea what it was that had happened. I just felt something was different. So for me, it was the opposite of what Vince is sitting with the group and saying. I had no idea what it was.
Okay, that changes things for me. But would it be accurate to say that you now do have some kind of an understanding of what happened?
Yes.
So your conceptualization happened afterwards.
Afterwards, yes.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah.
So you didn't have any context for this when it happened?
No, I had no idea what it was. It was just.
So you're like that Roberts lady who stepped on the bus.
Pardon?
So you're a bit like that Roberts lady who stepped on the bus and woke up.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe. It was, yeah.
Was it one moment?
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't have a concept of it. Mine happened in different sections, but every shift was really big. But I didn't have a concept of it, and then one doesn't, because a lot of people do wake up and wander around for years, not understanding why their life is so weird and different, and that doesn't.
And if they go to a psychiatrist, he'll conceptualize that they're schizophrenic or something, won't he?
Yeah. Just one more question to Pernil. when you say everything collapsed, did also reactivity patterns collapse at the same time, or you worked with them later? Everything, literally everything.
Everything.
Resistance to
Yes, and
life
and
collapsed.
yeah, and couldn't understand why people were so, angry about things and so upset, so, creating dramas out of things. It was just, yeah.
Oh, I want what you had.
Well, I felt that now looking back at it, it's like I fell backwards into it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
What was happening
Somebody
just
else used
before
that description.
What was that? What was happening before that? I got a diagnosis of cancer.
Okay.
I got
The setup, yeah.
I got a diagnosis of cancer and got 4 months left to live. And I was reading everything to find out how I could cure myself for cancer. And I read, I have to say that before that, I had a solid meditation practice and been doing a lot of, especially the Satipatthana Sutta and a lot with, actually also with Fetter works. I just didn't understand it really. Especially the Heart Sutra. I was super fixated on that and I didn't understand it at all. But then I read all the books about cancer, and then I read a sentence in one of the books where it said that 80% of all people with cancer die. 100% of all people die. And that kind of like it clicked in me, an understanding that just because I had cancer and a prognosis that was really bad, it didn't mean that I was dying more than anybody else. I wasn't dying more just because I could be hit by a bus before dying of cancer. And then I went to bed, and when I woke up next morning, everything was different. Everything had fallen, everything was different, and I understood the Heart Sutra. So it was like something happened in my brain.
Yeah, I think a good test would be read Ramana Maharshi before you wake up, and then read it when you think you've woken up. And if you understand it, you know you've done all right.
Yeah, it was that experience I had with the Heart Sutra that because internet is just form and form is emptiness. I seriously, but afterwards it was like emptiness is form and form is emptiness. Got it.
Okay.
Okay, But it's also why I find it so interesting with LU, and I find these groups so interesting because I've been trying to kind of create a program, and I have had that in Danish, and create a program where I talk about all the attachment that we have to things, to diet, to our habits, to our family, our past. So I've been trying to do that, use the Fetter work and talk about the 10 fetters without using Pali terms and without using Buddhism, but using ways for people to see through self. And then working in groups. I have always been working in groups, having people in groups where they were there and coming every other week for 6 months from 9 to 5, and then completely. It was great. Yeah. So it's kind of backwards the way I have done it, trying to find how can I formulate this experience that I have to people, kind of like showing a light so people can see, yeah. So it's been really great. So reading about Kevin's Fetter model, it's only been a few months that I have known about Kevin's Fetter model. And I really found that very, very interesting. And then I got interested in LU and everything they do. And I've really liked the way that the concept is built. Obviously, the way that I work with it is more circular, parallel, or it's not as linear as Kevin's Fetter model. But super useful, super useful. And it's also why I'm so glad we can do this.
Oh yeah, fascinating. I just remember something that when I had this big shift, and I wrote to one of my Buddhist guides. I don't know how to call him. There at the meditation center, and I just wrote him, yeah, I had a big shift. I saw no self. Like, I felt enlightened back then, that I have to mention as well. And then just he replied to me, and he just said, like, you know, you just had a glimpse of emptiness. You have to let it go. Just let it go. And then I cannot let go. This feels so good. But this is so true, actually. And any other shift later, even the non-dual shift, even the emptiness shift, when it's clear, it has to be letting go and transcended until everything becomes just what it is. Yeah. And every thought is just that. Every thought is just that. And but that's so important. Even the good experiences, just letting go. It doesn't mean that you have to push them away, but learn to have a balance. Okay, this is just the experience. It's still not stabilized completely. And yeah, just wanted to mention that it was huge later for me, not immediately, but later in the process. Definitely learning to let go was very, very important.
And it all becomes ordinary again.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
I am just coming back to life again, but from another direction now. This is it. It's very simple and ordinary. And the experience is gone of no self in a way. Yeah. And emptiness is just back to life. Like, I think Kevin mentions that in his 9 or 10 Fetter, like, mountains are again mountains, rivers again rivers. So relationships again relationships. It's everything, just because everything collapses, awakening collapses, emptiness collapses. So learning to let go, it's early in the process. Definitely, it's a good thing.
What an amazing journey!
Sorry.
What an amazing journey it is. It's incredible. Oh, yeah. I mean, I've been totally obsessed at times. Probably all have.
Oh yeah, it's just ridiculous.
I think really the biggest thing for me that the biggest advice I can give people is just to look at assumptions. Really look into assumptions, how much you assume, because everything you assume, it's not reality. And there's like the list of assumptions we have every single day about everything. It's every single thought we have is based in assumptions, and something that is going to happen in the future, or that has had regrets about what happened in the past. There's no presence whatsoever in it. We're not there. We're not here at all. So becoming aware of assumptions, how much we assume about ourselves and other people, and how the day is going to be, and it's a lot. It's really a lot, and it's such a relief. Like Kathy said, you don't have to believe the thoughts. You don't have to do what the thoughts tell you to do. Yeah.
Did the thoughts for you, Pernille, slow down, or just basically not just slow down, but also some of them are not appearing anymore?
Yeah, I have because I have always had a really good meditation practice. But definitely it has changed. It changed very much after awakening, very much. I've just had a brain injury that I'm just coming out of, and it's been 10 years with in the beginning, where I couldn't read and I couldn't write and I couldn't understand conversation, and so it's been a lot of one-pointedness and just focus on now and now and now, and I didn't have a memory. I had first in the beginning just 3-hour memory, and then it was up to 3-day memory, but I couldn't recall anything. So it's been very much a focus on just being on now and now and now. And then when my memory came back, it's not how it works, but it's how it was for me, that it felt like my memory came back, and then all of a sudden I could remember. And then I celebrated that by creating the YouTube channel. starting to talk about this. So, yeah. So yeah, I would say that there's also a shift in me from after the awakening, before the accident, and then now after the accident, and 10 years with one-pointedness awareness, and now has really, I can recommend that. Solitude in 10 months where you don't, in 10 years where you don't speak with anybody and don't read anything and not being online, and I can recommend that.
Oh, that would be great, right?
I feel like giving a contrasting story when I heard the really dramatic accounts of Leona and Branimir and Granola and so on. It wasn't like that at all for me. I really started with Angelo DeLulo's book, Awake, It's Your Turn. And that got me in touch for the first time with the possibility of being an experience in a really immersive way. And that was really tangible and real. And I realized there's another way to be, and suddenly I didn't doubt that it was possible to awaken. But nothing really seemed to happen. I did LU and I got some insight from that and so forth, but nothing really happened until one day I realized, oh, I haven't been suffering for about 2 months. And so what was really important to me was shikantaza, meditating and in a natural way, and just being totally immersed in direct experience. Keeping a journal, and that was important because I found a lot of the videos and readings and so forth, they target different people at different levels, and the words are never exact. And so I had to reformulate things in my own words to make sense of them and to build on it. So anything else? Yeah, one thing that was persistently helpful to me was remembering that things are just the way they are and they can't be otherwise. And realizing there was really no choice but to accept every moment exactly as it is, and that's kept me on track throughout, every up and down. Guess that's a good good time to end the narrative.
It's so great, Jeffrey. It's really the part about that you can't argue with reality. What is, and all the things we want, to be different than what it is. It's completely pointless. Completely pointless. I love that. Really love that.
Yeah, that what you said. There is no choice, about this. Actually, about what is happening. There's no choice. This is everything. Actually, this is now the texture of everything. The other choice is suffering, because the other choice is resistance and suffering. And this is, I cannot emphasize enough how, even if you don't go through awakening, a good point, very good point.
You have to prod Sandra to get her to talk.
Sandra, before you tell your story, could you just introduce you just say, you're Sandra and where you are? Because we also have, I'm going to upload this on Spotify as well. So for people to know your name and which continent you're on.
I'm Sandra and I'm in Portugal and Portuguese. So, my background, I think my main background was self-help. I realized I thought something was wrong with me. So I had to find a way to be better so that I suffer less and people around me also wouldn't be so that I wouldn't be a problem to people around me, to my family and friends and all that. So I started searching, and I searched for a long time in every kind of way, mostly by reading, because I don't, mostly by reading. And there is everything from angels to Reiki to Buddhism, everything. And I found liberation unleashed. And I jumped like a little children that found something amazing. It was like Christmas Day and you have a present, you are all excited and you want it all. And it was a very fast process. I saw no self very fast. And at the time, I didn't realize that's not very common. People take a long time, usually, to see no self. And I saw that very fast because my guide told me, look, and I did. And there it was, no self. And it was amazing. It was like falling in love. Everything was different. Everything was the same. And I had this honeymoon for a month or more, where I would have pain in the body and I didn't care because everything was fine. And the stressful situations were there, but everything was fine. And I was in the clouds and it was amazing. And I was in love with life and all that. And I start guiding right away because I want to keep close to liberation unleashed and close to the seeing of no self. And I was afraid to lose it if I didn't talk about that with other people. So guiding seemed to be the better solution to keep me looking. And I guided for 10 years almost. This year it will make 10 years. Yeah. To me, it was not this amazing, mind-blowing thing where everything seems to be different, and I was falling in a rabbit hole. It was a very clear seeing that here, as this is, there's no self. You look to where you think a self is in the thinking, in your body, where you are, where you're not, in the past, in the future, where you think of a self maybe, and you see that it's all a big illusion. And I think that's very easy to do. So when people go around and around, getting caught in their thinking and in their expectations, I go, oh my God, can't you see how simple it is?
Just
You just
look.
have to look. Look.
Yeah.
Oh. I would say life got better or easier because after the honeymoon, there still was all the suffering and all the patterns and all the life was the same, and I was very similar to how it was before. And I think changing that to me has been a very gradual process where I have to look and see what's going on, and things fall, but in a very progressive way. Yeah.
I love the simplicity that you have with it. I really, really do.
It's so simple.
Yeah, but because you're so right. You're so right. Come on,
That's-
guys.
I think
It's so simple.
it's very simple, and maybe that's why it's so complicated to make people believe, to make people drop all that is in the way of seeing how simple it is.
And the simplicity is just finding out that it's just thoughts. It's just thoughts that is telling you that something is in a certain way. If you really, really look, it's nothing but thoughts.
Yes, but what tells you it's thoughts is the thought. It's also a
Yes.
thought. So
I think that it's a thought
you
too.
have to look to what isn't a thought and see what is here. Can you see yourself here? And to me, it's very easy to see there isn't one, but I have clients that go, okay, I can see yourself, but and the story doesn't drop, and they go into all the justifications they can find, so to doubt what they see. Yeah.
I think that Angelo mentioned in one of his videos, it's simple but not easy. And this is something that
Yes.
resonates.
Sandra
something
always has a good way of pointing out the simplicity of it. And I know for me, once when we were talking, Sandra, because, you know, the echoing of doubt through other fetters, or, you know, other illusions, if you want to put it that way, other aspects of the illusion of self, certainly been one for me. And hearing other people's experiences and thinking, oh, well, that's not really ever happened for me, particularly around the dissolution of subject-object type things. So, oh, therefore, maybe that means I haven't really seen through self and I just thought I did, and, you know, still suffering. So, you know, mustn't have happened, even though it was so clear at the time. And I was talking to Sandra and she said, I just don't understand how you can doubt that someone can come along and say one thing and you go, oh, well, therefore, maybe it mustn't have happened. And as soon as she said it, I went, yeah, that's true. It's like, if someone came to me and said, you're wrong, there is a self, it's in you, you know that quite clearly, I would just have no doubt that they're wrong about that, you know, and that doubt is from my own experience. So how can it be so simple that, you know, you hear something about someone else's experience and suddenly go, oh, well, therefore it mustn't be blah, 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 you know. We return to what's doubtless. That's a great touchstone.
When I finished my conversation with my Helio guide, I was sure that even if she told me, no, you're not right, there is a self and you're wrong, I would not believe her.
Mm.
Yeah.
I really love that both of you are bringing that up, and it's also why I think it's so important that we have another talk where we talk about doubt, because it is a huge one, and like you say, Kathy, it's one that is resurfacing all the time in all the following fetters, that is resurfacing, and you keep comparing yourself, and like Sandra is saying, that it's just keep looking at it the same way, but it's yeah.
Mm.
And I think there are also lots of persons that think that they have to work to get it. They
Mm.
have to they have to climb the mountain, and they
Yeah.
have to do a lot of efforts and lots of exercises, and they have to suffer.
And
they-
meditate for hours. Yeah.
I never meditated, so
Mm.
I prefer the blue pill.
yeah.
Isn't
They
that Viagra?
No, not that one.
Vince, it's
Oh my
not that
God.
easy. Come on.
Yeah.
I was thinking of the Matrix and the red and the blue pill. Yeah, not Viagra. Yeah.
It reminds me of you're talking, Penilla, about that you sort of were a bit obsessed with the Heart Sutra, and you didn't understand it until something happened, and then you did. I like that saying. I don't know if it's from Buddhism or where it is, but there's that saying, when the student is ready, the teacher arrives.
Mm.
And that could be a nice little story of someone turning up at your gate. But one thing that has resonated for me with that is how you can read the same thing, or you can hear the same pointer over and over and over, but really, until something is a little bit out of the way, it won't hit you, or you won't really understand it.
Yeah.
And one of those for me, and if you don't mind, I want to read this out because it's the gift that keeps on giving over the years, and I'm sure people know it. It's not that long, don't worry. Is from Lama Gendun Rinpoche. I can't remember the name of it, but it says, happiness cannot be found through great effort and willpower, but is already present in open relaxation and letting go. Don't strain yourself. There's nothing to do or undo. Whatever momentarily arises in the body-mind has no real importance at all, has little reality whatsoever. Why identify with and become attached to it, passing judgment upon it and ourselves? Far better to simply let the entire game happen on its own, springing up and falling back like waves, without changing or manipulating anything, and notice how everything vanishes and reappears, magically, again and again, time without end. Only our searching for happiness prevents us from seeing it. It's like a vivid rainbow which you pursue without ever catching, or a dog chasing its own tail. Although peace and happiness do not exist as an actual thing or place, it's always available and accompanies you every instant. Don't believe in the reality of good and bad experiences. They are like today's ephemeral weather, like rainbows in the sky. Wanting to grasp the ungraspable, you exhaust yourself in vain. As soon as you open and relax this tight fist of grasping, infinite space is there, open, inviting, and comfortable. Make use of this spaciousness, this freedom and natural ease. Don't search any further, looking for the great awakened elephant who is already resting quietly at home in front of your own hearth. Nothing to do or undo, nothing to force, nothing to want, and nothing missing. Emaho, marvelous. Everything happens by itself.
Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
That one-
lovely. It's lovely.
Well, yeah.
But there's a big, huge but here, and that makes absolute sense to all of us. But to those still seeking, it'll be like water off a duck's back.
Well,
You
no,
know?
that's
They'll
kind of the point
recognise
I'm
it as
making.
nice words, but it won't change anything for them unless they're ready. And this is the big thing.
I think you're right, Vince. I remember I was literally battling with the Heart Sutra for 15 years. I did not 10 years or something like that. Really, I did not understand it. No sound. What is it? No sound, color, smell, taste, touch. What do you mean? I can hear, I can see, I can. What do you mean? And I was meditating. I had been meditating for years over that, and I did not understand it until I did, and then it was like, oh,
Of course. Of course.
And actually, my
Yeah.
point was that this has been resonating throughout the whole, like ever since I first read this, which may have been or heard it probably on a meditation retreat. which may have been, 2023. I learned to meditate 20 years ago. And so, but and as I said before, like my realization of the illusion of self was kind of gradual and not like one big kind of event. So this is sort of the point I'm making about, and this is just one thing for me. Everybody's got their own version of when the student is ready, the teacher arrives. It can just be about glimpses. And one of the things in that made me think of it, because I was going to mention it in my story anyway, because it comes up, is just the clue about resting, which I think we were starting to talk about. I can't quite remember before. So it's fine to say, well, we might get that, but others won't. But that's not necessarily true, because there may be something in there that just opens a glimpse,
A little
of
seed.
this.
Yeah.
And also that can be taken as a bit of an instruction. Like, don't get too caught up in the comings and goings of the day. Like, you could say that to someone walking along the street that's not on any kind of path, and it may resonate. So, but I think when something cracks open a bit, whether that's gradual or a sudden realization, you can come back to these things and read them again and go, oh my God, that was there all along, and I only saw this bit of it. Or it hits you at a deeper level, or like what Penilla's saying about the Heart Sutra, stuff that can just be, oh, that's wrong, that's ridiculous, starts to become a pointer to the truth of the fabric of reality.
Yeah, you're right. That because we also need to be humble to the fact that there's seeds, small seeds in everything,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess my emphasis is really on the ground, the conditions that'll enable that seed to sprout. And I'll start my story, I guess. And it comes from, I can remember as a, I don't know, 6-7-year-old in early primary school, hating it, feeling unpleasant sensations a lot of the time, not making friends, feeling different, and jump forward. And I remember that school was about a mile from my home. Back in those days, we had miles, not kilometres. And I'd walk each day to school and home. And at some point, I started reading, and I would read as I walked. So I actually, at that stage, was obsessive. And when I read a book a day for years and years and years and years and years. I read until 2 a.m. under the covers with a torch every night, and struggled to get out of bed for school every morning. And I felt different. I felt not like a person should feel. I did not feel normal. I didn't have that. So kick forward, and a lot of effort in trying to be normal. And then one day walking home reading, the realization hit me that the world that I constructed in my head treated me much better than the actual world out there, where I was a loner and I was unhappy and so on and so on. So consequently, I gave validity to my story creating ability, and reading certainly gave that a big boost. I was able to live in my head. My thoughts were my friends, and I was very active with my thoughts all my life. But anyway, then life intervenes as it does, and I guess still in an attempt to be normal, I joined the Navy. So as a 18-year-old, and hated it. once again, suffered throughout the whole experience. You know, I was just not fit enough. I couldn't keep up with everybody on the runs that we had to do every day, and so on and so on. And I hated it. And I got dermatitis, and I ended up getting a medical discharge because of that. So here I am, still suffering, a lot of suffering, and a lot of suffering with an obsessive personality. Right, still reading a lot. At that stage, my wife couldn't understand. I'd wake up and pick up a book and start reading it, and I would read at the dinner table, and I would be reading all the time, you know, and she never understood why. But anyway, that was my fantasy creation thing. So somewhere I got married. When I was 20, and or 21, I don't remember. But anyway, I at that point, my seeking moved in a religious direction. So I became a Baha'i. So I didn't, you know, the Christian religion wasn't for me, because I'd already seen the whatever. But the Baha'i religion, you know, promised some good stuff. So I got into that for about 2 years, and one day I saw the hypocrisy of the other people who were Baha'i members, and that dropped immediately. And so the things started to happen at a psychological level. I started doing encounter groups, and I started doing Gestalt therapy, and I got very heavily into those things. And the transition from being a client to being a practitioner was easy for me always. No matter what I did, as soon as I knew what was going on, I'd be teaching it, kind of thing. So I was running encounter groups, and lots of them. And I don't know if you know what encounter groups are, but they certainly, shadow work would be a good way to describe it, in a big way, really big time. I started doing Vipassana meditation, and just in my usual obsessive way, I did multiple 10-day retreats and a couple of 20-day retreats with Vipassana, until one day I asked somebody who did even more Vipassana. In fact, he did Vipassana 24/7. And I said, where's all the enlightened people from this Vipassana? And he said, oh, next lifetime. I hope next lifetime. I went, oh, fuck. That was the end of that one for me. Yeah. So anyway, so mooching on with time, and then my sister-in-law had breast cancer, and inoperable terminal breast cancer, and my wife was caring for her for about the last 2 years of her life down in Melbourne. So that was about an 11-hour drive away from where we lived. And she was down there full time, and we took our caravan down and put it up in the front yard, and she lived in the caravan, and I would go down and visit and stay in the caravan. And I was in the caravan, and with time on my hands and doing what obsessive people do, I was searching the internet for anything to do with this waking up thing. I was still calling it enlightenment back in those days. I wanted enlightenment. And looking back, there was certainly a level of arrogance there that I could get enlightened. Even if most people can't, I could get enlightened. But that was a very much a funny self story. But anyway, it was an arrogance, so it was a big ego thing. But at the same time, there was a jump forward to, in that caravan, in that search, and it was amazing how little I could find on the internet. I looked and looked and looked and looked, and I was pretty good at looking around on the internet, but I could not find very much to do with this waking up stuff until after I woke up, and then I couldn't believe how much stuff was there. But anyway, in that caravan, I remember I came across this bloke in America. Eric Gross was his name, and he was a bit, I don't know, somehow a little bit non-dual in his writings. I think I don't really remember clearly that now, but anyway, but I contacted him, and I forget how. Anyway, he said, have a Zoom session with me, or back in those days it was another program, Skype then, and pay me $50. And I always carried this thing around in me that, you know, if people are going to charge money, then they're not the real deal. But I was pretty desperate at this stage. So I did. I paid him $50, and he said something to me that was the clincher, that caused things to happen for me. But before I tell you that one, I'll just jump back 12 months before that. 12 months before that, I had such a strong feeling that I was close to this thing called, I still called it enlightenment back in those days. I was so sure that I was close that I actually said, I'm going to record what happens. I'm going to start a blog and do a diary, if you like, of this happening. And I started the blog, and I called it On the Verge. I was so sure that it was going to happen for me. And as it turned out, that was 12 months before it did happen. So, and I kept that, and it's still there, that whole blog journey, which is a great ramble, but there it is anyway. So there's two things. What you said, Branimir, was really right. You've got to be obsessed with this. There's nothing in life but this urge to wake up. If that's really strong, if that drives you every day, then you're laughing. That's the biggest prerequisite, I reckon, to it happening. But I have heard about people where it just happens to them as they step on the bus and so on. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, back to Eric Gross, and what he said to me was, he said, Vince, he said, the mosquito bite of seeking will never heal while you keep scratching it. And what thoughts arose for me about that was that they're incompatible. A seeker cannot be awake. While ever I'm a seeker, I'm stopping myself from waking up. That was the big thing that hit me. That was that really, really boing. And I dropped being a seeker almost straight away. I just dropped it. And when I dropped it, I saw, this is it. 3 words in capitals in neon walked around in front of me. This is it. This is it. This is it. Well, this is it. They're all true. I saw that in such a big way. And with that came the realization that by the time I become aware of what I'm experiencing, it's already done. It's finished. So what is the point of wanting it to be different? All that can do is create suffering. It can only corrupt the situation. The best thing I can do to this is nothing. Not change it by doing nothing, just accepting it. So total acceptance of what I become aware of as my experience is the only possible way to go. And as a result of that, I had it's getting to be vague memory, and I do recognize that memories change all the time, so as I reconstruct them. But I went for a walk and had some psychedelic experiences on that walk where the ground came up to meet my feet and the trees were inside me, and it was pretty great for a while. But that was, you know, I think a day or so that might have hung around for. And so I was pretty high on this is it. Wow, this is it. How much energy have I got now? I'm not fighting it. Now I'm just going, yeah, come on in. This is it. That freed up a huge amount of energy, an absolute incredible amount of energy that was just being chipped away at all the time with frustrations and anxieties and things that didn't need to be there. Absolutely amazing. But I don't know, within about a week, I suppose, doubts started to come along. Doubts arrived. So I'm back on the internet searching again for more stuff, but having a better success now because I'm kind of doing it better because of this new perspective I've got. And I came across LU and I thought, these people can either confirm or deny the fact that I've had a shift, that I've woken up. I forget the terminology I thought in those days. And I must say, as I tell this story, that seems like it was another person that all that happened to me. It doesn't really compute that it's me that it happened to. It's almost like I'm telling you a story about a movie I saw rather than personal experience. But I re-experienced some of the stuff telling you stories too. That got things going for me. So when I got to LU, the first thing they did was ask me all those first lot of questions, and then this, I called him this Nazi man, came on, and he was going to see whether I was awake or not, and he kept asking me about, is it necessary for there to be an experiencer doing the experiencing of something experienced? Now I'm paraphrasing him, but that's basically what he was saying. And it was very clear to me that no, we don't need an experiencer. We don't need the experienced, because they're the same thing in the experiencing, you know. But I couldn't kind of get the message across to him in a way that he was happy with, and he kept coming back and asking more. And in the end, he said, "Yeah, okay, you're right, you're in," kind of thing. So I immediately started guiding. But when they asked me about no self, it was clear to me, it wasn't never an issue for me about self or no self. What was very clear to me all along, and if you relate back to my early story as a kid in mind creation stuff, it was very clear to me that self was a story that I created. There was no actual self. It was just me reacting to what I believed about myself. And that was all a creation. That was just so clear. So no self never dropped away from me. It just was probably never there, or something. I don't know. You know, I can't. It's still very clear to me that self is just a construct that people respond to like it's real. That's all. Yeah. All right. So, advice for people. God, I don't know. I have no idea about what advice to give. But if you're not obsessed, take a break until you are. That's.
I actually thank you very much, Vincent. I actually think you had the really good point with a seeker is seeking. A seeker cannot find. you know.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
it's in the job. When you're seeking, you will keep seeking. You cannot
Yep.
find when you're seeking,
Yep.
because then you'll find it. Yeah.
And what I didn't say, but a big part of the thing for me is that there's identification, incredibly strong identification in being a seeker, because a seeker is a good person, and I'm a good person. And if I give up seeking, maybe I'll give up being a good person. Oh, I don't know, you know. But there's a lot of identification in being a seeker, very strong identification. I mean, some people identify being a supporter of a football team or whatever, and they're really emotional about that. So identification has a pretty strong hooks, you know.
Yeah. And then the other thing was realizing that this is it. There's not something better around the corner. There's not something else. There's not something lacking or missing, you know. This is as good as it gets, you know. This is it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we really should say this was it.
Yeah, it already was. Yeah.
I have to go, but this has been wonderful.
Thank
Thanks
you
for
so
inviting
much, Jeff. Thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, it's so good to talk like this, isn't it? I forgot during the meeting that we were doing this for your
We still are. Yeah.
church.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really good. It's really, really, really good. Well, you said something else, Vincent, I was thinking. I forgot what it was. Next time.
I'll say one thing.
Yeah.
To really trust in life, because it will bring you exactly what you need. That's what I've learned.
And what about I don't know how much longer we've got, but I wonder whether part of it for people is just coming to terms with what you think is going to happen when you see through the eye versus what does happen, and particularly around that feeling of the eye. I know for me that was one thing. I thought that if you really saw through it, you wouldn't feel any sense of eye. But instead, what happened years ago when I saw through it was that I realized that the eye comes and goes. Just like any feeling comes and goes, and any thought comes and goes, and that there's no one controlling, you know, there's no I making an I do anything. That's a bit like the thing before I was saying about it's like a thought trying to do something about another thought. That was at that point. I don't know if that's slightly different for me today, but I'd be interested in hearing what people would say about the illusion of self and the feeling of I.
Yeah, when I look, there is no feeling of I. There are feelings, but I have to think about it to make it a feeling of I. So it's only a mental construction. The I feeling. It's not an I feeling. It's a feeling I ascribe an I to, or not. But if it's just the feeling without description, there's no I involved. Here, I don't know about for other people. Yeah.
I think there's always going to be a subtler and subtler sense of I until all the fetters drop. And that's what we're trying to see through. You know,
Yeah.
it's level on fetter 1, and it gets more progressively more subtle as each fetter drops.
Yeah. And it occurred to me that the why that I'm going to construct, the why of it is because it's the best movie going at the moment.
Sometimes horror.
Mine's more like the Three Stooges comedy thing.
I think also, yeah, if there's still some attachment, there's still some I. You're attached to
Of
anything.
course.
There has to be.
Yeah,
There
yeah.
has to be
So
some I.
I went for 10, 11 years not suffering, but still being triggered. And it wasn't until the Fetters come along that I figured that, well, if I'm being triggered, then yeah, there's still identification with I going on. And the part of me that says, well, you should get rid of that is, as I say, it's the best movie going at the moment, so why not? You know, it's entertaining, and I get good feelings out of these things, and as you can see, as anything, you know, hard to find a good comedy these days, but here I am.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to talk about feeling of I, definitely. It's a complex thing, right? It's many things. I would rather call it selfing. For me, it was always more like a process, dealing with some selfing process than feeling of self or I, because there are many things and beliefs that have to be dissolved at the end. Yeah, maybe from this perspective, it's easier to talk. But I know and if you ask, 10 random people on the street, explain me what is self or what is I mean, they would give you 10 different answers, probably. Either it's a thought, either it's a sensation, either it's, emotions, this or that. So, it's there's no such thing. So it's not, there's no clear answer to it.
And most people would have to say, what? I've never considered that question.
Yeah, right. Yeah, definitely. I mean, 9 of 10.
What do you think, Todd?
I agree that, well, with everybody, really. I think, like, personally speaking, there were a lot of thoughts that were very self-referential, and the more the attachment to those thoughts was lessened and lessened, and the more there was just looking in at what is there, and of course there's nothing there, it definitely has weakened. And then I think breaking 4 and 5 was also like, there was like a whole other level of it that dropped away after that, and I still continuing to work on. And I think, like, just reading Kevin's and Christiane's stuff in their dialogues with other people, when people are working on 6, they're still talking about feeling like, me, the subject, versus that thing, the object. And then when you get to 7, it's me, the perceiver, versus that thing. And then when you get to the 8, it's still the sense of I. And like Leona said, there's always going to be this kind of gradual procession of layers just kind of unfolding after each other. And I think it's just that the belief in the association with them at that time, how strong they are and how much we get caught in the moment. And it's like Branimir said, it's like a process. It's just like constantly, it's a constant change, and and no moment of selfing is necessarily the same as any other moment of selfing.
So Kathy, when you
go on.
When you have this experience of a self,
I don't think I said I had that, but go on. Yeah.
I'll go on. All right. So well, that's what I'm imagining that you're saying, that you still feel a sense of self, maybe you're saying, rather than the actual self. So you're
I was
seeing
asking the question because I think that is, and I don't guide in LU, but I know for me that was sort of an impediment back in the day going through LU.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that can be a point of confusion, that because there is a feeling of an I, even when you,
Yes, yeah.
you know, break down into direct experience, it can lead people to kind of doubt, I suppose, that because that's there, that must mean that I haven't really seen through anything.
Right.
But
yeah.
actually, I think what gets revealed over and over again is, even like the others have said it much more clearly than I could, about how, you know, it maybe can start out very strong, and then as you look into it, it becomes more subtle, and then it shows up, like the nature of the illusion shows up differently in a way, the more exposed it becomes. And I think what's revealed is that it's that just has no substance. So every time
Yeah,
you look,
yeah.
and I suppose, you know, through the Fetter model, there's a good guide to how the illusion sort of has been built
Yeah.
or continues to rebuild itself. But each time you look at it, it becomes insubstantial. The truth of its insubstantiality, I should say, is revealed. So I was just interested in what people would say about it, that's all.
Yeah, I think we put a lot of emphasis at LU, or there is a lot of emphasis on our thoughts. And so we I guess lead people to question whether they need to believe their thoughts automatically. But we don't, and because of this thing called direct experiencing, we tend to put down thoughts and put up experiencing. But what we find that people do with this sense of self is that they believe a feeling, like they used to believe a thought, now they're believing a feeling. But if you look at it closely, they're not believing the feeling, they're believing the story that they create about the feeling. But they don't realize that they're creating that story. They think they're responding directly to the feeling.
Well, I think the feeling gets revealed as not one thing, and not
Yes,
a
yes,
feeling
yeah.
in itself.
And the stories of thoughts, of course.
And the what?
The stories of thoughts.
Yeah, the stories of thoughts. Yeah.
But
The feeling is a thought, really.
Sorry, Kathy.
Yeah, no, go on.
I also think it's important to have some kind of structure or direction. I know that all of it is going to get dissolved eventually, but in the beginning, it's important. I find it helpful to make people become aware of what is thought and what is created by the mind as fantasy, and then you have reality, and that is your sensory experiences, what you can see, what you can smell, what you can hear, what you can feel, and in taste and touch and that is like reality. That is what is real. But further down the line, that is going to be dissolved as well, because you cannot rely on your senses either. But I think as a structure to begin with, it's a great tool to become aware of the two differences in what we assume to be reality and what is reality, until we dissolve that too.
Yeah. Well, that's the separation of the sensation and the story about the sensation. So when they're separate, you've got the real thing, the sensation, and you know about the story that you've put on top of it.
My memory is really bad, but Kathy, you didn't actually share your story, did you?
I shared bits of it, I think.
You
Yeah.
didn't really, did you want to?
Well, I think, what else is there to say about it, really? I think leading up to, well, again, I can't really point to one particular event. I think I had, I used to do a lot of retreats, meditation retreats. And some of the experience that others have spoken about to do with really vivid, almost, well, I wouldn't say trippy, but just very clear sort of sensory experiences used to happen to me a bit on retreats and just after. And some of those were, like, I remember one time coming back from a retreat and I was standing at the sink doing the dishes and I was looking at my hands and it was like, oh, whose hands are these? You know, so I think there were some clues along the way or experiences. And then there were other moments of things like, you know, talking about these stories that run and these ideas that we have about the world and the inner kind of monologue, dialogue kind of going on that, you know, sounds like it's in my voice. And I remember one day driving along and whatever thought was going, and I went, who am I talking to in my head? You know? and that
interrupting
kind
the
of
conversation.
yeah that caused a shift, definitely, because there's something about, I suppose in my experience of this, is there's something about just what causes that dialogue to stop, and when it stops things open up, and when things open up there's a, you know, a different experience of the world than the one that's chatting away. So there were things like that. But yeah, really, it was. I decided to try and explore the dhyana states, and you know, meditation states. I thought, well, you know, here I am. I'm going along to all these retreats, and I was in an ordination process with the Buddhist organization that I was in, and it was all really about stopping suffering and the blissful sort of states of meditation. I thought, well, why don't I just get on with creating more positive mental states? That's what it's all about. And I decided to really have a good crack at getting into these different states. And I don't know, I feel like I didn't get very far. I certainly enjoyed it. I remember once having a real clue about, you know, this effort, like that thing that I read before about rest and relaxation, because I was meditating, trying so hard, and I felt like I was choking. And I went, oh, so maybe that's a good clue to back off a bit. And really, I think somewhere along that line, and I can't remember exactly where, but, you know, very sort of like early in the dhyana state, so to speak. So only really at the first one. There's, you know, four or eight of them. I can't remember what the insight was, but it became then like a clue about emptiness. And so after that, I used to be part of leading a meditation group in the town where I lived with a couple of others. And one night this guy came along, and we were sitting having a cup of tea. This is all around the time of the meditation stuff I was doing. And he said something about this guy whose book he'd been reading. This was Ken MacLeod. And I can't even remember what he said, but it was enough to make me go and kind of have a look at the book and to have a look at who this guy was. And it kind of coincided with this interest in emptiness. What is it? And again, like the experiences that I'd sort of had of people talking about it around me, or what I was reading at the time, just made it seem really remote. So I hadn't really clicked to anything about that before this. And then when I was listening to a talk by Ken MacLeod, and he described this this process, or this he had this guide toward looking into experience and looking into self, which wasn't who am I? It didn't have the word I in it at all. Because I had by that stage encountered, as I said before, you know, the sort of in the hearing only the heard, and in the seeing only the seen, and who sees and who hears. It was quite clear to me that I did. And then when I listened to his talk, and his guide was to go into direct experience, the seeing, the hearing, he had a way of kind of getting you to relax your vision and to take in the whole visual field, and ask what experience is this, and to look for this sort of minor shift. I can't remember what his words were about it, but a bit like that thing I was talking about of driving along and going, well, who is this voice talking to? There was a shift, and asking the question, what experience is this? And just waiting with no verbal answer. There just was a shift, and I went, okay, is that all? Is that all I'm looking for, kind of thing? But it was momentous, because it gave me a way of actually looking into my experience without the my of the experience, and just allowing it to be what it is. I hadn't even realized that it could be that minor, like that you could see it at such a minor, simple level. I thought for any experience of emptiness, it would have to be this major thing, you know. And I thought that non-self meant no existence of something. I didn't know what. Instead of seeing that it's not that there's no existence, it's just that you don't exist in the way that you think you do all the time, every moment of every day. Yeah. And then I left the ordination process at that time. I remember being on a retreat, and we were sitting around studying a text, and people talking about themselves and their experiences. And it just felt to me like we were all just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. And I wasn't critical of anyone there, or the retreat or the organization, but something in me just couldn't stay there anymore. And I ended up leaving the retreat. It's the first time I've ever left a retreat early. I couldn't even say why. And then I remember being at home, and I was laying on my pillow, and I'd listened to another talk by Ken MacLeod, and it was more around this pointing of what experience is this. And I just had this sense of relief and a few tears, and I went, oh, it's over. But I didn't know what was over, you know. And it certainly wasn't the end of any suffering or anything like that. So I don't know what that was really. It was maybe just a clue that, like in that thing I read before, that the awakened elephant I was seeking wasn't out in the jungle, but was sleeping at my fireplace, that it was here, that, you know, yeah, anyway. And then I can't even remember how I stumbled on Liberation Unleashed. I think it was probably through the Buddhist organization that I was kicking around in, because people were starting to drift into that. So I went looking, and I went through the process. And that was pretty quick. I think that was only like a week or so. That was like 10 years ago, I think I did that now, 7 or 10 or something. Yeah, and it's just been unfolding ever since, really. Yeah. You know, I think I've spoken today about, I think I probably am someone who's prone to doubt. And when I came into the Fetters group recently, I think I told you all, it was because I kind of got to a point of going, I thought this, you know, I thought this was all about suffering and ending suffering. And here I am still suffering all these years later, one way or another. Could quite clearly see that it was from my own thinking and the stories, and some sense of identification and belief. And I just kind of thought, well, I'm giving all of this up, and I'm just going to live in a fantasy land. I'm just going to, you know, if thoughts are the
You
problem,
already do.
yeah. Well, that's right. But, you know, a different fantasy land.
Yeah.
Instead of believing the thoughts about, you know, that made me unhappy, I was just going to make ones up. You know, what's, you know, even if that's about a unicorn living in my garden, what does it matter?
Absolutely, why not? Yeah.
And that was a kind of good experiment. You know, I think I got into a bit of magical thinking, which did nothing, you know, except just gave me some momentary fun, really. But yeah, I think that maybe part of the doubt was not really, I had encountered the Fetter's model, but never in a way that Kevin put it forward. And I think I had just misunderstood that, because on the one hand, like Sandra pointed me to, and I was sort of going, oh, maybe I didn't really wake up like I thought I did. I'd never used those words. Maybe I didn't really see through this. But I couldn't really, every time I looked, I couldn't doubt that the self was an illusion. So what, but maybe I mustn't have, because here I am still suffering, because I hadn't really understood the layers of the illusion of self, that you can have the initial seeing through, but really that's just almost the end point of how the self is constructed, the self, in inverted commas, and that you have to kind of, I think, work backwards one way or another then from the initial seeing of the stories and the fantasies and the thoughts that aren't believable, and, you know, they're not believable because they're inherently unreal, to what else the mechanism is. And that's why I think that feeling of I is a subtle thing, and it is an insubstantial thing, but I like the Fetter's model because it gives you, it gives you a way of really looking into the nature of not just the stories, but the actual construction of the world through the subject object. Well, I want to say mechanism, but whatever that is. And then beyond that, I don't know. I've really, when Pernilla asked me to be a part of this, I was thinking I don't really have anything to say about it, because I don't have an event like that, you know. And also, I suppose it was helpful. I went back and read, when I joined the Fetters group, I went back and read my guiding in LU. And I think, you know, I'd said to people here before, it was interesting that at the time, it was profound. It was, but it wasn't like a big wow factor kind of thing. Like some people have had real sort of perceptual changes from it and things like that. But I went back and read it, and I thought, it's interesting. Now that just seems like common sense to me. So I think there was something sort of lasting from it, definitely. But I find it hard to say what it is. Yeah.
I'm going to have to say goodnight because it's quite late here.
It is.
Lovely to talk to you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, always, Leona.
Thank you so much for being here, Leona. I'm really happy about that.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah.
Anytime.
Good.
Bye.
Good. We're gonna have another one, so that's good. Bye.
Bye.
I have a quick. Thank you so much for sharing that, Kathy. And I find it funny that you have the thing about doubt, and then you doubt why you should be here, because you haven't had great enough experiences to come here and share about it. I find that funny.
Sorry, I didn't mean to say that I doubted that. It's more just like I don't. Yeah.
But the whole point of this is to tell people that there are as many experiences with seeing through self as there, and every single experience you have is valid. Whatever you experience is valid, and you can't compare with anyone. You can use all the different stories as information to see which of them relates to you or is similar to your situation. Some of them are and some of them aren't. There's no right or wrong way to do any of it. There's just
I know.
there's just people.
Yeah.
I have a question before we start. No, before we end. And it's a question that I have experienced a lot. And Leona and Todd, you also talked about it. It's the part of that fear of, if I'm doing this, I'm gonna go mad. I'm gonna leave my family. I'm gonna quit my job. I'm not gonna be able to. I'm gonna end up in a cave somewhere. Could any of you talk about that? Because obviously, when you have seen through self, it's just a funny anecdote that you have, but it's really a thing. So many people are really, really scared of doing this because they're afraid of losing who they are. Obviously, hearing people saying that they're becoming more who they are, but they're afraid of something horrendous happening. Could any of you say something about that? Do you have any experience with it, or have you experienced anyone you have guided having that experience?
I don't remember being afraid. I was very enthusiastic and very curious, and I don't remember fear.
Yeah, I didn't experience any fear either.
No.
One of the things that comes to mind is that we're talking about seeds, but we need to focus a little on the ground that they'll grow in, and the people. So what happens? What in my experience was a lifetime. I was officially a searcher for 43 years. And then something happened and I stopped seeking. Okay. I had a lifetime of shadow work and experiences that meant that by the time I got to the awakening stage, I'd already worked through most of the stuff. So consequently, I wouldn't expect a really big dramatic thing to happen. But for those who have lived a life of denial about their emotions in particular, absolutely, I can see how they're going to feel like they're standing on a precipice and and trying to pluck up the courage to jump, because that fear is palpable for them, because they've never experienced their dark side, so to speak. So it depends on people and their own lifetime of experiences. Nobody just wakes up. Those people who just wake up spontaneously have still spent a lifetime leading up to that point. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, it was also what I said, that I started meditating when I was 13. Started with the Satipatthana Sutta and then moved on to the Heart Sutra that I didn't understand and spent, yeah.
Sorry, guys, I have to leave. It's very late here.
Yeah, I know. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really happy.
Sure. It was great.
Yeah, thank you.
Great here. I should join more often, definitely. So see you soon, probably.
Yeah.
Good
We'll give you leeway until you finish your PhD, then we'll see you regularly.
Yeah, definitely. That's the plan.
Thank you so much.
Sure, you're welcome.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
I also think it might be time. We are going on 2 hours and 45 minutes now. Is there anything you want to say as a final nugget before we end, or should we just say goodnight?
I can't get a hold of this final thing.
No.
Just that we'll do more, eh?
Yeah, I would like to for this 3-continent of awakening to also be about the next one is going to be about doubt, and I'm really looking forward to meeting you guys again and talk about that. So I'm going to stop the recording and then say proper good night to all of you. So thank you very much for participating in this, and see you in the next one.
Okay.
Thank you.
See you